Good evening. I apologize for starting a few minutes late this evening. I'm Jennifer Stapleton, City Administrator here in City of Sandpoint, and I'm filling in for the mayor for this workshop this evening. He's had a family emergency, so I'm starting the workshop this week and will likely have the mayor back for our second workshop next week. This is our first of a series of 3 workshops that will be presenting and discussing some of the challenges, the concepts, and the proposed solutions at 3 different locations within the city. We've kind of grouped them together. And so we will be presenting tonight our Amanda, our Infrastructure Development Services Director, and our consultants who've been working on the Transportation Master Plan. Our multimodal plan will be presenting on the process, again, some of the issues, the concepts and solutions, and the way that we will handle this so that we have the ability for engagement back and forth. You have a Q&A box on this Zoom meeting, and you can submit questions as we're going through these presentations, and Amanda will try to incorporate those in. We'll try to get as many of the questions addressed as possible. And we're going to break this up into really 2 different groups tonight. And at the end of halfway through in our presentation, we will open it up for public comment, general public comment, and we're going to treat this like we do our city council meetings. So you'll have 3 minutes to make public comment, and we have Melissa Ward, our city clerk, handling the meeting for us tonight, so managing our meeting, and she will help us with managing public comment. We are recording this meeting and it will be available moving forward. So if you have friends, neighbors, coworkers who were not able to participate tonight, we will have this available using the same link that we've been made available on our website, on Facebook, and through the Engage Sandpoint app. So you can go back and reference the actual presentation. And also just a reminder that we have this available online with the concepts. We'll be loading up the concepts for next week's workshop here by the end of the day tomorrow, and you can submit any comments that you have for this week's concepts as well as next week's online as well. So if something comes to mind after tonight's meeting and you want to add it later, you can sign in online and do that. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amanda, our Infrastructure Development Services Director. And Amanda, if you can give some history about the master planning process again, where we are, and introduce our consultants who will be presenting.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. Let me see if I can turn my camera on.
I'm going to reclaim host and make you host.
Okay.
You should be able to turn your camera on.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you. Sorry about the technology challenge that I was having there for a second. Well, we are really excited to have tonight's conversation and begin the next phase of our public engagement effort, which is the fun part, the solutions. We have spent approximately the last year going over past plans, past concepts, as well as really learning more from the community about what the current challenges are and what areas they would like to see us focus the most on. So before I introduce our consultants, I just wanted to give a little bit of background that these modules are focused around those elements that we have heard the most throughout the community. This is not all inclusive of every project that the multimodal plan has taken into consideration. I also just wanted to mention that by multimodal, we are really focusing on all users. So it's not putting a priority on one user over another. However, some of the modules might, for the sake of clarity, focus on one user to depict the image that we're trying to convey. However, as you'll see throughout all three modules, at the end of this, they really come together and bring all users back together in the conversation. So with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce our team. They have been working really hard over the past year. With us tonight, we have Mandy Roberts with OTAC. Mandy is a licensed landscape architect with over 25 years of experience in the industry and helping a variety of communities across the nation, many of which are similar to Sandpoint and some of the challenges that we face. Mandy leads our team. She serves as the project manager, overseeing the entire multimodal plan. And then also with us tonight is Preston Stinger. He is a sub-consultant to OTAC. He works with Fair and Pierce, and he is a professional engineer, specifically a transportation professional and planner. So welcome both of you. We are really excited to have you here tonight, and I am going to turn this over to the two of you to go through our module number 1. And as Jennifer mentioned, we're going to go ahead and let our consultants give us a full explanation of kind of what the challenges were, what we heard, and how we've incorporated that feedback. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, mute myself, and then Mandy, I'll let you take the reign.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Thanks, everyone. We're happy to be here with you tonight. And first of all, what we're going to talk about is the East-West connection short-term plan that we have conceptualized for this area shown on the map. And this really addresses some key intersections such as First and Superior, First and Pine, Fifth and Pine, Fifth and Church, Euclid and Pine, Sixth and Pine, US 2, and the Pine Street corridor. And last but not least, the First Avenue Bridge Street area, which also is closely interrelated to First Avenue and Church Street and how that operates. So our team has really looked at this area in depth and analyzed the intersections and looked at the way that traffic is moving through the area. And we've proposed some both short-term and long-term recommendations for consideration to improve, in particular, east-west connectivity through Sandpoint, getting people who are traveling through the community on their way more quickly, more efficiently, more safely, and also providing access into downtown. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Preston, who will talk through the specific recommendations that are shown here on the graphic for each location. Preston?
All right, thanks, Mandy. Hey, hello, everyone. I'm Preston. Happy to be here and talk about this. It's been a fun project, and as Amanda mentioned, there's been a lot of work into this, and it's been great to hear from the community on what you'd like to see and where your passions are, and we tried to incorporate those as best we could. To follow up on what Mandy mentioned, the key things you see on the screen here are really to encourage and to establish a good east-west connection from Highway 95 to US 2 and the rest of town to the west. Because as it sits today, you come off of Highway 95 and you kind of filter in through the neighborhood unless you do take First Ave and Pine Street over. But there's nothing to really stop anyone from filtering through the neighborhoods. And that was some of the comments we heard from you all, is that the cut through traffic through the neighborhoods around Superior and Lake is at a level that's not comfortable for the residents. So we'll walk through a couple of these here. A lot of this was looked at a high level of analysis, and then we kind of fine-tuned into some more micro level analysis at some of these locations to make sure that these solutions that have been recommended do work and are effective in doing what we were intending them to do. So we'll start with number 1 on the screen, which is at Pine and Fifth. And this is the short-term plan here that we're looking at. So the most immediate things to do that kind of give us the best bang for our buck, so to speak. So at number one, we are recommending that a signal be put in place there and move the signal at Church Street, I guess remove the signal at Church Street and put a signal at Pine Street. And by doing so, it provides a better spacing, better distance between our signalized intersections along US 2. Because as you're aware, at Church Street and 5th, you do have some congestion there during peak times and during your peak months, where you see queues of cars spilling back into other intersections, both into the core of town and north and south on 5th Avenue. And to the north of us at Cedar, it's not too far away, that signal. And if we can get better distance between signals, the better flow of traffic we have in the end. So by moving it to Pine, we have better equidistance between signals between Boyer and at Cedar. We're also recommending that that section of Pine Street from 5th Avenue to 4th Avenue, that is restricted to one-way today. We are recommending that that be opened up to two-way traffic, and that really encourages some great east-west travel on Pine Street. Whereas today, if you wanted, it's restricted to eastbound one way, and in order to go westbound, you have to go up through town and up to Church Ave or further up on 4th. So with that recommendation, we really establish a good east-west connection on a street that's supposed to have higher traffic as a hierarchy of roadways, Pine Street being one of our arterials, and that's where we want to keep the brunt of our traffic who wants to cut through to the highways. Let's see, I think I've covered things there. Maybe I'll cover a couple of those minor circles there to the west of Pine Street, still on Highway 2 and Pine there. So we have Euclid and we have 6th Avenue, which those are two minor recommendations, but really are important from a safety perspective and also just to not restrict movements on Pine and keep the traffic flow moving along the major highway. And what we recommend is restricting those to right in, right out movements. So if your vehicle traveling east on Highway 2 and Pine, you can only turn right onto Euclid and go south at that location. And same if you're coming out of Euclid, you can only turn right out and not be able to turn left out, which given this location of these two intersections, they both sit on a short segment of the road and there's curves. You can see the curve right next to 6th there on this west side, and then obviously the curve that goes up on 5th to the east, and that's the major movement. And by restricting some of those movements, we really reduce the conflict points there and make it a little safer. Moving over to number 2. Well, Mandy, do we want to talk about number 2 now? The First and Bridge.
Yeah, let's do, and what we might want to do is first do an overview and then move into the detailed view. Amanda, if you want to show that in a minute.
Okay. So big overview of Bridge and First Avenue there, the big circle. That is, as you're probably very aware, that's a location that gets very congested during your peak times, especially in the summer, where you have large amounts of pedestrians and bicycles traveling through this area. And, there are crosswalks there, and pedestrians do have the right of way once they enter the roadway, which makes the vehicles yield to them, which is the appropriate thing to do. And we do want to encourage good pedestrian movement in this area and good bicycle movement. And we are trying to facilitate that as well. But in addition to that, we do need to keep traffic moving to clear things out. And right now there are queues that back up across Bridge Street and into the beach and in both directions on First Ave as well. So in the short term, well, in the westbound direction, if you're heading west on Bridge and want to go south on First, it's signed today that left turns are not allowed during those peak months. Even though it's signed that way, motorists do what they want and go the direction they want without any physical barriers, and they still make that movement, which causes even more delaying congestion in that area. So the short-term recommendation is to put in some temporary, or I guess maybe not temporary is the right word, but removable planters that we put in place to physically restrict those left turn movements from occurring. And that reduces the conflict. So again, it increases safety for all users, not just vehicular, but also pedestrian. And it forces people to only turn right off of bridge and go north, which reduces a lot of the congestion there. Want me to touch on number 3 before we jump to the detail of bridge and first, or do you want to jump to the bridge and first?
I think Amanda might have some questions that have come in through the chat. Do
Great.
you want to stop here, Amanda, and address those?
Yes, actually, Preston, you hit the nail on the head. I think let's go ahead and talk on number 3 there before we move on to the image at bridge and first, and then we'll chime in with some questions.
Okay,
Perfect.
thank you.
All right, and then lastly on number 3 there on the sheet, that's at First and Superior, and that is kind of an abnormal intersection. Generally you'd have typical stop signs on your minor streets, but with this being the major street is kind of the L shape of the street, it's a little abnormal in how it needs to be controlled, and it causes some confusion. I know there aren't a lot of crash history there, but a lot of close calls there from a crash perspective. So trying to clean that up and reduce some of the conflicts that occur there. In the short term, we're recommending some high-level recommendations of striping and signage to help restrict or deter as much as possible some of these movements that are causing issues, but also are creating some cut-through traffic into the neighborhood. And by doing so, we'll reduce some of that cut-through going westbound into Superior, and then southbound as well, or westbound to southbound, that left turn. Both of those movements do cause delay and congestion. The intersection in itself doesn't have a lot of delay and congestion per se. It's really the conflicts that are causing the issues, and that's what we're trying to clean up here.
Thank you, Preston. I would like to ask you and Mandy both if you could tell us a little bit about having the benefits of a traditional grid network system and how that kind of fits in with this proposed short-term solution. Specifically, what we're showing here with the intent of you, as you've described, is focused around having, collectors and arterials moving traffic in and out, and in some ways, and in some perspectives, possibly avoiding that traditional grid network that is in the downtown core and in the neighborhood below it. I know we've had really good conversations with our committees associated with this planning effort, who talked a lot about some of the pedestrian concerns and the bicycle concerns within that neighborhood as a result of the cut through traffic. Can you kind of speak to us a little bit about how you came up with this solution and how it may hopefully benefit some of those challenges that the neighborhood's experiencing?
Yeah, I will go ahead and have Preston speak to that, but I just want to say that, you're really fortunate to have a grid network in the downtown, and it facilitates both local access and neighborhood access as well as through access, which is a real benefit to this planning effort. So Preston, you want to talk about specifics related to that? Yeah,
sure. So great introductions there on the grid network, and thanks for bringing that up. Grids are awesome. I mean, they're lifesavers for towns and cities. You'll notice some of the newer parts of towns throughout the nation, as they start to build more and more cul-de-sacs, and people want quiet streets and so forth, which they do create that. But there's unintended consequences with not having grids, and you push a lot of your traffic to just one or two locations on streets or intersections, and that's when your system starts to break down from a overall delay and travel time perspective. So what a grid does is it helps you disperse and distribute your traffic, and I should say not just traffic, but all modes of transportation. So it creates shorter distances of travel for your active transportation users, your bikes and your pedestrians, and that makes it much more conducive for them to travel by that mode because it's shorter distances. And for vehicles, it again is less out of direction travel, and it is dispersion of that delay. So you don't have a couple major bottleneck areas, but you're able to disperse that traffic. So in your downtown core, well, a lot of your town is the grid network already. You'll see, with nice straight lines that I'm not drawing, but that's the way they are. And then your nice streets here with Church and Oak and Cedars would go further north and so forth. So you can see there's a great grid that people have lots of options to travel on. And with that, we wanted to create, so there's kind of a hierarchy of streets. You have your arterials that carry more traffic and have more capacity to carry traffic. And then you kind of go down from there with your collector streets that carry less traffic and a little more conducive to your active transportation users, and then to your local streets, which are more in your neighborhoods. And we like to keep it that way and try to keep our, heavier traffic or cut through traffic on our arterials, which is what we're trying to show or trying to provide here with this short-term plan is a good east-west connection on Pine. And so with this movement here being our predominant movement in those directions, and try to keep our local streets more local and not with your regional traffic that's traveling in the area. And then we can still utilize, if you wanted to go out in the core of town today, you can use first, and you can use second, you can use third, and you can use fourth in both directions, obviously. And by having this one-way street converted to a two-way, that really opens up the grid again that used to be there and facilitates that for us. Anything else you want me to touch on there, Amanda, that I missed from your comment?
No, that was excellent. Thank you. I had one other question for you that we've heard a lot about, and that is around the intersection there at First and Superior. I know in the past we've had conversations related to roundabouts. Can you talk to us a little bit about the various options you considered at this location and where and how we landed on this current proposal?
You bet. So we looked at first, we heard a lot of comments from the community on that intersection, and Mandy and I were trying to figure out, what do we do here? And what is the problem? Is it a congestion and delay problem for vehicles? Is it a pedestrian problem? Is it a wayfinding problem? Is it a safety problem? And answers to all those were kind of yes. There's all those issues. There's some wayfinding issues. There's a little bit of delay here and there, but it's not like we have excessive queues that are spilling back into other areas, and people are waiting there for a long time. That's not happening, but it is confusing, and we really don't know where to go. And Google Maps is telling us to go down this way instead of this way. So we were just trying to simplify it. And once we figured out, we did some initial analysis at that intersection, had some counts done there, and analyzed those vehicle counts to see if there is a delay issue. And it's showing that there really isn't a delay issue, but can a different intersection control help clean things up from a usability standpoint? So that's when we started looking at a roundabout. Roundabouts work best when you have equal traffic on all sides of your roundabout, entering and exiting, which is not the case here because our predominant movement is west to north and south to east. It's kind of oblong in terms of volume. So it really wasn't conducive to a roundabout working really well from that standpoint. We also looked at a signal, and if traffic volumes and population and so forth continue to grow, which results in higher traffic volumes, is substantially over what is out there today, then we likely need to look at some different control there, which would likely be a signal in this case, because the predominant movements will still be the way they are on the screen there, where a roundabout would not be the best solution. So it would likely be a signal.
And that would be a long-term possibility, right, Preston?
That's
I
right,
mean,
yep.
yeah.
I guess before we leave this one, I have another really common question we get, and that is about the current signal at Fifth and Church and kind of the history there, because that really went into place, as you both know, when our downtown streets were reverted to their current configuration in two-way direction. And there was a lot of modeling that went in, traffic modeling at the time by ITD, that necessitated that signal at Church and Fifth and resulted in our current configuration of one-way on Pine between Fourth and Fifth. I know that was backed by pretty solid engineering and data at the time. We have a note on here that mentions eliminating that signal and basically moving it to Pine. Why couldn't we just have a signal at Pine today and leave the one there at Church? That has been proposed by a lot of folks, and I'm wondering, Preston, if you can kind of explain that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when you look at a traffic signal, they have timings that the whatever jurisdiction who has ownership over the signal, they plug in there, and you have your signal timing plans in there, and they say there's going to be this much green time for you to go on the green light. We'll give this much green time to another movement to go at that same time. And when you have closer spaced intersections, they need to be coordinated, those timings, so that when you leave one signal and come up to the next, ideally that's somewhat changing at about the same time that you arrive there and kind of the platoon of cars goes through. When you start to get really closely spaced intersections, kind of less than 600 feet, then that really starts to break down, and it's harder to coordinate those without having cues that back up into the other signal that's nearby. And in this case, if we had one here at Church and then we had a new one here at Pine, that distance between the two is only about 250 feet, which is really short of a distance. That's a very small amount of cars that would have to queue before it's built back into the intersection. And once we have queues spilling back into the other intersection and it turns red and the other movements start going, but they can't go, then we have more issues where we start creating some gridlock situations throughout town by doing that. So we try to keep as much distance between signals as we possibly can. And as I mentioned before, 600 feet's kind of the rule of thumb of minimum spacing that you'd like to see. But equidistance between intersections and make sure they're well coordinated. In this case, while we could coordinate those signals, it would be very difficult to do so without causing some impacts there.
And how have the conversations with ITD recently progressed as a result of the modeling? How are they feeling about this signal here at Pine?
They are, and I'll let Mandy and Amanda, if you want to speak up on this as well, since I was out of town last week, but it based on our initial conversations, it sounds like they are in favor of this. They wanted to make sure that they wanted to check out our analysis and results and the traffic modeling that have been done and make sure they're comfortable with it, which they did, and reviewed the models and got really positive feedback from them on this seems like a go, and they're interested in moving forward, or I should say they are okay with the way it sits today and in the short term. And Mandy, is there anything you want to add to that, being in that meeting last week?
I think you're covering it well. They're very supportive of the idea, but just want to make sure that we continue to consider modeling and traffic volumes and patterns as we progress towards that solution. I don't know, Amanda, if you want to add anything, but
Thank you. I think you both covered it really well. I appreciate all the effort that you've spent coordinating with ITD. And I think they've to date been a really great partner in this effort as we've continued to bounce ideas back and forth and really dive into the details of the analysis. So thank you both for that. We do not have any questions currently in the chat on this particular image. So I think we'll go ahead and move forward with that deeper dive into the intersection of First and Bridge, and then see if we get any additional questions from there.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Well, we're teeing that up. I just want to say that this is a very conceptual plan, and ultimately, once a determination is made to move forward with this, an engineering plan would be developed that would look, more specifically at dimensions and channelization and whatnot. But I consider this to be a concept that we think is a viable recommendation for the short term and a way to really help to manage the intensive multimodal activity that's happening at the intersection of First and Bridge, particularly during the summer peak season when there are high volumes of pedestrians crossing in that area. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Preston to just talk a little bit about some of the specifics in this concept.
You bet. So we talked about the current issue today of this left turn, which based on signage is not supposed to be allowed, but individuals do it anyway. So they want to turn left there. And because they want to turn left and you've got your southbound traffic wanting to go through and your left traffic there who wants to go on bridge as well, those left turns have to yield to that. Whereas if they're only allowed to do a right turn, they're only waiting for pedestrians and a gap in the northbound traffic. So those left turns are really causing some issues, and signage is not doing its job. So we're needing to do something beyond just some signing and striping. So the concept here on the screen is a short-term plan to utilize some barriers, whether they're planters or something that looks nice, but that is still movable when they need to be movable. It may be during the winter time that this isn't much of an issue and they can be removed, or can be removed for ease of snow plowing or something like that. That's kind of the purpose behind planters instead of a concrete barrier, for instance. So those planters are physically restricting left turns from happening. Now they can't just easily turn out without crashing through a planter. So that's their purpose there. And that will really, and we did some analysis here on this as well. This wasn't just putting some lines on paper, but we backed it up with some traffic modeling, had some traffic counts done. We did pedestrian counts as well, so we understood what the magnitude of pedestrian volumes were crossing at these crosswalks and how much vehicles had to yield to them, as well as the bikes. And so that's all taken into account. And by doing this short-term plan, it really helps alleviate things in the short term, and cleans things up. Eventually, there's going to need to be something done beyond just this, because we do still see some issues during your peak summer that can't be cleared up just with some planters, but we can talk about that later.
Thank you, Preston. And I think actually, if you don't mind, could you talk a little bit more about that sort of 10,000 foot view concept of a plaza at this location if it became warranted in the future? I know at a prior city council meeting, we had a bit of a conversation about it and discussed that it would essentially restrict movements northbound, as well as movements coming from Church, creating a plaza there just north of Bridge Street on First Avenue, we got a bit of concerns that the public would not be interested in that and have, I guess, hesitation in restricting movements through our First Avenue downtown core. Can you kind of speak a little bit more about what that enabled and from a traffic perspective, how that improved level of service?
Yeah, that's this is I'm calling it a fun concept because it's something that really moves the needle in terms of improvements, but understanding that there are some consequences, I guess, that occur with this that we should talk about as well. But let's talk about the concept at a high level, which is, as Amanda mentioned, it's basically creating a plaza area here. So this is all filled in, and this could be, details of that to remain to be determined, but they could be at the same level as the sidewalk, or just keep it at the street level and put planters on the outside of it, something like that, or just bring it all up into the same levels as sidewalks and have more of a plaza area that could be utilized for whatever events or just general pedestrian traffic. So with this concept, we now have, I'll change color of my pen here. So we now have free flow traffic doing this movement out of bridge, and free flow traffic doing that movement onto bridge. And then over here on Church is the same thing, just in the opposite direction. So free flow that way and free flow back that way, but no traffic through the middle of the plaza. So what this does is it completely takes out the need for stop signs. So traffic does not need to yield to any other traffic at this point. It's a free flow movement. The only thing traffic's yielding to are pedestrians and bikes who would be crossing at your crosswalk. And by having this plaza area here in the middle, that creates a whole nother area for pedestrians to cross. So for instance, if there are pedestrians crossing here and want to go here today, with this improvement, they could now make that movement, but by doing this and not ever getting in the path of a vehicle, which both helps them from a safety perspective and also helps the vehicles from a delay and congestion perspective. So it allows a pretty nice area for pedestrians to cross without having to use crosswalks. But we still have crosswalks because there's still a need for that route to happen.
Yeah. And I might add too, just with the grid system throughout downtown, there are many other opportunities for people to move north-south through downtown. So even though this particular location would be blocked to access, there's a lot of other places where people could go north-south or get close to here, park and walk. And this would just really free up that congestion that's happening, particularly at First and Bridge, but also at the Church intersection.
That's a really good point, Mandy. This is where the beauty of the grid system comes into play. This is how it works so awesomely, because something can happen on one street and you still have 6 other options. Now we don't want to continue the same concept down each avenue as we go west and completely block off the grid system. And in an ideal world, we wouldn't close this off. We'd have it open and it would be great. But unfortunately, we've got some congestion to deal with and some major conflicts with pedestrians and vehicles that need to be dealt with that have kind of forced our hand down this route. And it really frees things up. And by having that grid system to the west, we have all those options. And the benefit of this is going to sound weird, but the benefit of closing off the grid here is it removes cut through traffic that may have been using First Ave coming from Highway 95 and coming up First. It removes some of that cut through traffic that maybe is going through the core of town instead of using Pine Street to go to Church to get to the signal, or just continue up First all the way up to Cedar and so forth. And it really hopefully reduces some of the traffic demand in your core of town on First Avenue and makes it even more pedestrian friendly than it already is.
And thank you, Preston. I want to take just a little bit of a deeper dive into the technical side for a second, if we can. So I know you and I have had conversations about its current situation. In other words, if we left it as is and made no change, what is our current level of service and what does that word or phrase mean in engineering? So I'll give you that piece of it and then I'll kind of add to it.
Okay. Let's talk about level of service. So level of service is a term that is used in the traffic engineering world to grade your intersections. Kind of a similar grade that you get in school, A being a good grade and F being a bad grade. And then there's letters in between there being B, C, D. There's an E thrown in there and then an F. And they kind of match up to what you would think in school. A being pretty good, kind of free flow traffic, people moving around with ease with very limited delay. And then moving your way down all the way to F, which is kind of getting into your gridlock conditions, really hard to move around, excessive delays and long queues. And so that's how we analyze intersections, is based on those letter grades, which is associated with delay per vehicle. And so right now, at that intersection, if we do nothing, and we're going to talk about Saturday peak during kind of your summer months when we have lots of pedestrians and lots of cars wanting to be downtown, it's a level service F. And that is mainly because of the illegal movements that are occurring right now of people turning off of Bridge, going south down on First Avenue. So that's really what's causing a lot of it. The other thing that's causing it is just the vast amount of pedestrians that are keeping vehicles from moving. So if you did nothing, that's what's happening today. And that doesn't happen all year long, as you know. You can probably go out there today and it's not a big issue. But when you do come up with peak season, that is an issue. We did look at other alternatives there, and we wanted to see if we could put a traffic signal in there and see if we could get that to work. And it's kind of a funky intersection where we have these offset because of Church here and Bridge here, but they kind of operate as one. They're so closely spaced that it's a little bit awkward. So you'd have to put in a signal that controls kind of both of these together, and having that signal spaced the way it is, I don't want to get too much in the details of this, but the longer your intersection is, or the bigger the intersection is, the longer it takes for a car to pass through there. So you have to have longer cycle times or longer red times and longer yellow times of your lights to make sure traffic's clear before you let another movement go. And it just wasn't working. The signal wasn't a great solution for this. It improved things only by a few seconds. And we're still in the level service E and F range with a signal. So that wasn't a great alternative. We looked at other alternatives of putting a signal and allowing right turns to go and not restrict them. We didn't allow right turns in some cases because we were trying to allow pretty good pedestrian movement here. And we looked at restricting left turns even with the signal, and that helped things get up to a level service D. And I should say, generally, your jurisdictions are using level service D as the threshold of acceptable or not. So A, B, C, and D are considered okay and acceptable. You drop to an E and an F, and that means we should probably start looking at some mitigations to clear things up. And then we also looked at another solution of having a signal, but having an all red, kind of a ped scramble, I guess is what we'll call it, where we stop all traffic and allow traffic to cross through basically this plaza area, but no traffic's being able to move because of the red light, and that didn't work as well either. But once we start restricting some movements, as we talked about with the planters, and then eventually what we talked about as a potential long-term idea of completely blocking the road. It clears things up from the F that's there today to an A and a B, depending on if we're looking at bridge intersection or church intersection, which are, I mean, that's a vast improvement in the world of delay. And from a pedestrian standpoint, it's the same thing. We measure pedestrian delay because they're just as critical in this situation. Today, pedestrians really aren't inhibited by anything. They can kind of cross when they want to, and the cars yield to them, hopefully. And they're averaging about a 5-second delay to get across there. With the signals, that bumps way up into the 40 seconds range. So that's a big increase. And then going back to these solutions we're talking about here on the screen, it drops them back down to the 5 seconds that they're experiencing today.
Thank you, Preston. Mandy, maybe this is a question for you or with Preston as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about the area that is just to the south of Bridge Street and kind of the improvements there with shifting that sidewalk over to the face of the buildings, as well as, I'm going to make this a dual question, how do we get an 8-year-old girl or boy to City Beach?
Yes, thank you. Can you maybe pan up just a little bit to catch that area a little bit more? One of the challenges in this particular area right now is we have parking adjacent to the building where Starbucks is. And there's very little room there, and it's a little bit awkward for people to back out and exit. And so what this concept does is it moves that parking plus additional parking onto the street. So we're actually expanding the amount of parking in this particular block through the diagonal parking that you see. And the operational aspect of this is that this will act as kind of like a little local parking lot. And if we have folks on bicycles, families, children, what we're showing here, I don't know if you can see my cursor actually, but there's a cycle track. So this is a dedicated lane separated by a curb for bicyclists to move north and then onto Bridge. Thanks, Preston. I appreciate that. And so, and then a generous sidewalk area here next to the Starbucks and other businesses there that there's even enough space there that could provide cafes, outdoor cafe space, but definitely for groups of pedestrians walking to City Beach, there's adequate space there. So we think this kind of cleans up the issue of parking and limited access in front of the building, provides a generous sidewalk area, and then provides a safe cycle track for bicycling to and from City Beach. Any other questions about that? One thing that is a bit of a drawback of this concept is that for vehicles, you would need to, if you wanted to continue to go south from Bridge Street south, you would need to kind of go around the block and come back around to make that southbound movement. So I think there were some questions in the chat about that. How do you move throughout downtown? Well, again, it's kind of utilizing the grid, and you just move and make your turns and then come back around. And it might be slightly different than people are used to today, but you can still make the movements that you need to get to the places that you need to go.
Thanks, Mandy. And what about this widened existing sidewalk to shared path? So we have a shared path on Bridge Street, but we're also showing sharrows. What's that about?
Yeah, so on the north side of Bridge Street, we have an existing shared bike pedestrian path that a lot of people use to get to City Beach and to the waterfront. And what we're trying to do is basically facilitate access from both the south side of Bridge Street and north side of Bridge Street to get to that path. And the sharrows just really indicate to traffic on Bridge Street that there also could be bicyclists in the travel lane. So some bicyclists, especially people who are really avid and experienced bicyclists, they feel really comfortable traveling in traffic, and the speed is low enough on Bridge Street that that's not a problem for them. And so sharrows are just a great tool to indicate to everyone that we're sharing this space between vehicles and bicyclists. And in this environment, bicyclists can probably travel just as fast as cars. So it's a great opportunity to utilize sharrows for pedestrians or kids on bikes, small kids with their families. We have the opportunity for them to use, in particular, the widened existing sidewalk on the south, and then take the crosswalk here. I don't know, again, if you can see my cursor, but take the crosswalk here at the intersection to this space and get to the shared pedestrian bike path on the north side of Bridge Street. Thanks. All the way to City Beach. So it gives people more options as pedestrians and bicyclists, and also addresses the needs of young bicyclists who really feel more comfortable traveling on a path that's off the street.
Thank you, Mandy. The only bit of additional clarification I would add there is, as we've been talking through this concept, the idea of having bicycles on the sidewalk certainly has hazards associated with it, and it's not at all something that we're proposing for the entire downtown core. We do hear a lot from businesses and pedestrians in the area that bicyclists riding too fast on the sidewalk, or that when you step outside of a business, they're coming on you too fast, and it can be a bit scary. So the idea here in our conversations is that we would not have doors opening into this area like business doors. We wouldn't have tables and chairs sitting out there and obstructions, that it would really be intended as a safe place for kids on both the north side of Bridge Street as well as the south side of the street to move in and out of the downtown core to downtown. There were past concepts that showed bicyclists being able to use the Farman's Landing area to the north, or as it was previously called, Gunning's Alley, going this direction. However, the slopes associated with that really become challenging. And so the idea was trying to make our downtown core, the entire downtown core, safe as possible without just having a single block that segregated bicycles from the rest of the movement. So this was the solution that our team has landed on. I think the minimum width that we have discussed is actually 12 feet wide for a shared path, where we would allow bicycles and pedestrians in this isolated location to share that space, which frankly is already in place today on the bridge, the pedestrian bridge. We already have bicycles and pedestrians sharing that space, so they're just continuing that on. Is there anything, Preston or Mandy, that you would like to add that we've missed before we open this up for verbal questions and comments?
Just to tag on the back of what Mandy mentioned about how you get around this area, kind of the bigger scale of things. I know you closed out of the one graphic already, so I'll try to do it off of this one. But if you were with the grid system, this is First Ave, and just a block away we have Second Ave. So if you are on Bridge and are wanting to go north with the plaza concept that's being blocked off, you would have to go south on First, go over one block to Second, and then go up. If your destination was somewhere here near to the town here. If it was further north on Fifth Avenue, then that's great. So if this were blocked off here again, do that there. So if this were blocked off there, the way you would travel is that way to get back either to here or whatever direction you want to go. So there is, one block out of direction travel if that were the case. And if you're coming north on First Avenue and we're heading for Cedar and First, instead of going north on First, you'd come over to here and either go over on Church or go over on Main and or go all the way up to Cedar. So we're about one block out of direction than we would have been otherwise with this open. You don't have to go all the way over to Fifth Avenue to do what you need to do. That's it.
Thank you, Preston. And I think from a timing perspective and sequencing of projects, we in the past, I think it would be good for our attendees to kind of know that in the past we've talked about the implementation of Bridge and First and some of the new concept there. The short-term solution we could put in place today. It's really just a matter of emphasizing what's already there by putting in some temporary planters to help make sure we don't have that change in movement going southbound, or not change, but I would say non-permitted left turn out of City Beach onto First Avenue. So that's a pretty easy change we can make. There's striping in our downtown revitalization phase 3 project. We intend to do the sidewalk improvements that are shown in that graphic. But as far as, any plaza concept or restricting movements on First Avenue and blocking that, we've had conversations of, the rest of this would need to be implemented before we could do something like that. So we would really need the signal in place at Fifth and Pine. We would really need to have our First and Superior and sort of that east-west connection really well established before we were in a position to further consider restricting anything at Bridge and First, and to kind of see how well the short-term solution works. And I know the data is saying that we're going to get to a point where that short-term solution is going to feel kind of painful. And we're going to need to take a closer look at what right now is just kind of this 10,000 foot, idea. So I just wanted to have a brief conversation about timing. We're certainly not moving forward with recommending that we implement any plazas on First Avenue at this time. So. Anything else on that? Okay, well, I really appreciate the presentation. Thank you for taking a deep dive with all of us on it. Mandy and Preston, I think you guys have put a ton of hard work into this and a lot of thoughtful solutions. I'm going to go ahead and ask our clerk, similar to how we operate in a city council meeting or other commission meetings, to navigate us through public comments. And with that, similar to our city council meetings, we're going to ask that the public limit their comments to 3 minutes. So clerk, could you help us set timers and chime people in, and we will facilitate a conversation here. So thanks again, Mandy and Preston. I really appreciate it.
So if there's anyone in attendance who would like to ask a question verbally, please raise your hand. And Amanda, not seeing any hands raised. Helen Newton.
Yes, I was wondering during this planning process how much the business community downtown has been consulted with.
Did we lose Amanda? Are you still there, Amanda?
Helen?
Oops.
This is Mandy Roberts. I'll just chime in for the sake of starting to answer this question. If you can hear me, we've had really extensive community engagement throughout the planning process, and have had several public opportunities for involvement, including an extensive survey that we received more than, I think, 200 responses to. And then we've also been working with a Citizens Advisory Committee as well as a technical steering committee. So that has included representatives from throughout the city as well as folks from downtown. So hopefully that starts the answer, and maybe Amanda can chime in if she's there.
I
Thank
am.
you.
Thank you. I could not get my unmute button there.
Okay.
Yes, we have had extensive public engagement in that regard. We also established 2 committees, both an agency committee as well as a steering committee that comprised of, off of the top of my head, I would say nearly a dozen members per committee that have been intimately involved in meeting throughout this process. We've had a number of public workshops. We've held workshops on our sidewalk networks. We've also gone to city council and presented there with some of the ideas and findings from our engagement effort. So most of that effort, thankfully, kicked off before the pandemic, which was a blessing, because I will say that probably the last 4 to 5 months, we have had less public engagement, not less opportunity, but just less participation. So we were really pleased that we had such a robust effort there in the beginning. And I really commend our consultants for being strategic and creative in how we were engaging folks. They even went to things like the keg pole down on Cedar Street and attended different businesses. We've had display boards around town and various web hosting platforms as well. So I really appreciate all of their effort in that regard. Did that answer your question okay, Helen?
Yes, sounds good. I just wanted to make sure they were in the loop.
Yes, thank you. Well, last call for any other questions for our team. We're certainly happy to answer or hear any comments that you have. If you don't have questions and you just want to give us some feedback, we are all ears. While I wait to see if we have any last hands before we close tonight's workshop, I want to remind everyone that we're going to be hosting another workshop, same time next week on Thursday, 6 o'clock. We'll have our videos a little bit better dialed in and our mute buttons working better. So thank you for your patience this evening, but we're really hopeful that you'll take the time to join us for module number 2. Module number 2 is a fun one. We're going to be having a conversation about our sidewalk network, our bicycle routes, as well as the results from our road safety audit along Division and some of the solutions that our consultants are recommending that we move forward with in the plan. So excited about that one. Then the following week will be our last one, which is module 3. And that's where we're going to take a deep dive into the US 2 corridor and Fifth Avenue, as well as just kind of recap from all of these prior workshops. So again, thank you for everyone, or to everyone, for taking the time this evening to participate. Really grateful that you have listened in. And if you have questions that you want to ask after this, we're all ears. You can reach out directly to me by email or via phone. I'm also happy to set up one-on-one conversations. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here for you. You can find our contact information at sandpointidaho.gov. The links are all available in the news section on the front page there. So again, thank you everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful evening and a great weekend. Thank you.